Hi there. Today I'm here with Erik Hanchett. Erik is a software developer and a senior developer advocate over at AWS. He's from Reno, Nevada, and if you look at his name on Google, he's probably most known for front-end stuff, Vue.js. He has a YouTube channel. But today we are going to talk, what else could it be? AI. Because Erik has also been on the Kiro team, a code editor launched by AWS a couple of months ago. And I'm super excited to talk about how that happened and how it relates to other AWS core products. Erik, thank you for joining. How's it going?
Hey, thank you for having me. No, it's going great. Glad to be here. Glad to talk about all things Kiro and and everything you want to talk about. Yeah, let's jump in.
Yeah, perfect. Could you give us a brief introduction about yourself? Because I already mentioned it. You're more from the front end side, and you're with AWS for 5 years. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, no, yeah, thanks. I am a huge front end full stack fan. I started doing development years and years ago, and I just really loved doing front end development. I got into the Ember.js. If you remember that back in the day, I actually wrote
Oh
a
yeah.
book on Ember.js called the Ember.js Cookbook. As I was learning web development, I actually started doing more back end development first. I was doing Java development, I was doing C Sharp on the .NET stack. And then I just kind of started looking at more and more at the front end and all these amazing frameworks like React and Vue and Angular and Ember.js. And I started getting more and more into that. And it led me to publishing some books and deep diving into that community. In fact, I'm still really involved with the Vue.js community.
Mhm.
To this day, I'm giving a talk, a quick plug at VueConf in Atlanta in May. I'm really excited talking about the same topic you and me are talking about today. This kind of AI and
Yeah.
Kiro and this new agentic IDEs. So I've been doing front end development for years and years, and then I moved more into the developer advocacy space. Recently, I started off working as a front end engineer in the Amplify team at AWS.
Mhm.
That is a service that helps front end developers create apps on AWS. It also has this whole hosting service.
Mhm.
You can check that out at Amplify. And then I'm doing more of the developer advocacy work. I get to code a lot more, but more for fun, not as much in production. However, though, we do have a lot of open source projects that I still play around with and test out. And we're going to talk about one of them today called Strands. And yeah, that's a little bit about me. And yep, I live in the Reno, Nevada area, next to Lake Tahoe.
Oh, thank you. That was an awesome introduction.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So what was the open source project that you just
Yeah,
mentioned?
so I just want to. We have something called Strands Agents, which
Mhm.
is a SDK to help you run agents in the cloud. It's similar to Tanstack's AI, to AI SDK. So we have it for Vercel. We just released TypeScript a month ago. So it's an open source library to help you create agents.
So maybe we can dissect that a little bit. So maybe we start with the most obvious one. What is an agent? What is an agent? Is it just a program calling a chat API or a conversation
Yeah, I
API?
always think of it as like agent has a few pieces. An agent uh, talks to a large language model. It usually has something called a prompt in it. It can act on behalf of you in a certain
Mhm.
way. So it could, let's imagine your agent helps you book flights. It would have this sort of prompt embedded into it. And then it has something called tools, which tools connect to different services. It could connect to a database.
Mhm.
It could connect to an MCP server. MCP servers, I'm sure you've had some people on talking a lot about that. And it uses all these different tools to be able to figure out what you are looking for. And it goes through what we call like an agentic loop. So you might ask it a question, like, tell me what the best time is to fly to New York. And
Mm-hmm.
the agent will then have its system prompt like, hey, I'm an agent that helps people book flights. It'll then look through its list of tools. Oh, I have a tool that shows all the flights going to New York throughout the day.
Mm-hmm.
And I have another one that checks the weather. And I have another one that has some user preferences in it. And so I'm going to check all three of those. I'm going to keep going back and forth until I get the right answer. I'm going to talk to my large language model, my either a frontier model, whatever you have set up, state-of-the-art model, like let's say it's Claude. And then when I get the correct answer, I'm going to return it back to the user. So that sort of tool usage, creating agents this way, there's a lot of frameworks that help create those agents for you. Some of the most popular in the front end space, which I'll talk about, are like AI SDK, which is from Vercel. There's the LangGraph as well. There's TanStack AI I've been playing around with. That's from our friend Tanner Lindsay. He created his own AI SDK. And then Strands Agents, it's open source. It was originally came from AWS. We released it first for Python and now for TypeScript. And you can do those sort of same things with it.
So on the AWS platform, so what are the core services of AWS that helps you build such an agentic loop?
Well, I will say the open source library, it can actually work with anything. You don't have to use it with Amazon Bedrock or any AWS service. You can plug in your OpenAI, your Claude key, anything, any provider that you have in there.
Got it.
So that's a part of it. So AWS in general has, as many other companies are, we have lots of different services that help with AI. One of the ones that we've been talking a lot about is our Amazon Bedrock Agent Core, which is a set of services to help people run agents. So a couple of the features of it is it'll help do all the things like take your agent, it'll put it in a container, it'll host it in our AWS, containerize it. It will help you set up the endpoints. It will then scale as if you get more or less traffic. Then it has some nice built-in features like Agent Core Memory, which creates long-term and short-term memory that you can use to be able to save conversation history. We can get into more of that as well. And then we also have kind of overarching between all of these services is we released Kiro, which we can talk more about. Kiro is our agentic IDE. It's fairly new. And we also have a CLI. So we have an IDE version and we have a CLI. And those and that you don't even need to have an AWS account at all. It's completely separate. We don't it's not like AWS Kiro or Amazon Kiro. It's just Kiro. And we just have that out there for anyone to use. And it's a service. We have a free plan that you can try out today. And then there's also subscriptions for it.
So Kiro is basically an agent for coding.
But you can think of it like go ahead. Sorry.
So before we dive into Kiro, I really want to know about this memory thing. So we had it like we start with a system prompt. Let's say I want to book a flight, and inside that system prompt there is knowledge about what is relevant for someone booking a flight. Like you mentioned weather, you mentioned obviously flight schedules and prices, and then you have this list of tools and this communication back and forth with the LLM. So how do memory come into play here?
Well, so there's a lot of conversation online about context and how much information, when you talk to a large language model, does it understand before you overrun the context, and then you get paid, you get charged for extra tokens for it. Or I don't know if you've ever had this happen where you're talking to an agent
summarizing,
and it runs out of context space, and then it needs to summarize it, or sometimes it crashes or something like that. Well, what memory does is it has a couple of things. In Agent Core runtime, there's two types of memory. There's short-term and long-term memory. So the short-term memory is they call it turn-by-turn interactions. So every time you talk back and forth to it, it'll remember it. And it remembers it within a single session. So if I'm going back and forth and I say, hey, hi, my name is Erik. And it's like, oh, hi, Erik. And then I ask it, do you remember my name? It's like, oh, yes, you just told me I'm Erik. Your name is Erik. And that's kind of built into short-term memory itself. And that would be a part of Agent Core Runtime. So you don't have to save that interaction yourself. So if you talk to Claude or just talk to an LLM by itself, it doesn't necessarily remember that information back and forth. You have to have some sort of system put in place or put a database or anything in there. And then there's kind of like this long-term memory that instead of saving every single interaction, it looks for key insights. Like maybe you said you were, every time you take a flight, you like to have a aisle seat. So that might be a key thing that it remembers long term. So when you come back to it in sessions afterwards, not the current session, maybe 3 sessions ago, you said, oh, I like aisle seats. It should remember that as a key insight and then save that into its long-term memory. And the next time you're talking to it, it's like, okay, we found you an aisle seat for your next flight.
So how is short-term memory then different from just appending that previous conversations to the prompt? Is it like a tool call, or how does it work? How does the LLM access it?
Well, so it's kind of all under the covers for inside Agent Core Runtime. So you don't necessarily have to append it to the conversation history. And you're right. A lot of times if you look at code and people creating chatbots, that's what they're doing. They're taking the conversation history and they're just sending it to the LLM each time, which then increases the context size. This one, you don't necessarily do that. It's kind of in the background. We handle the retrieval of that long-term information, how it gets added into the context. It's more on demand, so it doesn't necessarily load up the context window for you. And we kind of handle that all behind the scenes.
Okay, but is it fair to say it's like a tool call? You say it's on demand, so it's not sent with every request.
Yeah, you could think of it as like an invisible, I guess, kind of like a tool call in some ways, where it knows that that's another piece of information that it can pull from and be able to keep the conversation going. You can also, there's a lot of setup inside of Agent Core Runtime where you can give it specific key insights of what it should remember and what it shouldn't remember, and you can tweak that a lot as well, especially for the long-term memory.
Okay, so the long-term memory, how does it identify what is a key insight and what is not?
Yeah, so when you enable the long-term memory, they're called strategies inside Agent Core Runtime. And each strategy gives you a name and description, and you give it a namespace. And you tell it basically what sort of memory that it should be remembering. So you could be like, remember, I think like a classic one is like just remember key topics. You can kind of define it in text, and the LLM will read that and understand exactly what you want. So maybe like anything related to user preference. User preference could be a key insight, and then it will remember that inside inside the long-term memory.
It's so funny because like most of those configuration is done really in natural language, which is like a shift in mindset for people developing software, right?
Exactly. Yeah, you have to kind of talk to it in natural language to set it up.
But speaking of software development, like you have that Kiro, you mentioned it. It's kind of an AWS product, but it's also a product on its own. So it's a Kiro dev, Kiro.dev, if you want to try that out, if I remember correctly.
Yeah.
And it basically came around, when did you release it?
So it came out last year. We were in developer preview for a few months, and then it went GA or general availability in November of 2025. So we're only technically a few months in, but we've been going very, very quickly, adding feature after feature. You know, the space is, there's so many new things coming out all the time. So we're getting inspiration from just the energy of everything's happening here.
So, and this was a time where like a lot of VS Code forks were released, and Kiro is one of them. And I was lucky enough to have been on the developer preview, so I got to play around with it a little. So it has some interesting tweaks to it. So in terms of it's different from other coding agent, whether they are on the command line or whether they are VS Code forks, and that is spec-driven development. Could you tell us a little bit about what that is? What's meant by that?
Yeah, and I just want to kind of go back when you said when we released the developer preview, we had such an amazing outputting of support, and we had tens of thousands of downloads of Kiro in just the first few days and weeks. We had to actually put up a wait list because we had so many people trying it out, which was fun. And then people found a way to go around the wait list. People were like, shit, it was very crazy. It was fun to be a part of that. And one thing that really caught people's attention and that made us different than some of our competitors was the spec-driven development aspect of it. And the way we think about that is typically we saw, and most people were using these AI editors were just vibe coding. They were just talking back and forth and be like, hey, I have this problem. Can you help me figure it out? And then it would spit out some code. Everybody found a different type of way to how that works. And then it would edit your code base. And what we found is that didn't always do what you expected it to do. You might ask it a simple question and it might edit 10 files, or you thought it was going to do this and it did that. And so from our actual users, we actually had we have a product called Amazon Q, and we heard a lot of feedback on that. It was similar. It didn't have the spec-driven development, but we kept hearing people saying, well, we need a better way to reason with the AI coding editor to make sure it does what we want it to do. And this is where the idea of spec-driven development came from, is just listening to our users and people saying, hey, it's not doing what we need to do. And what we saw our actual users were doing, they were doing this manual process. They were going in and they were telling their coding editor to create a design document for me for this app. And then it would go through and it would create a design document. And then they would go through, edit it, make a change. And they'd be like, okay, I'm trying to do XYZ. You created a design document for it. I want you to take that design document and create a requirements document for me. And then it would go through and it would create this requirements document. And then they would edit. And then they would tell the editor, can you please go through the requirements document from step 1 to step 4 and have it complete each step one by one and tell me what you're doing. So our users were already doing this because they couldn't get, it was so that the coding editors just weren't doing what they expected it to do. So they wanted it much more structured. So we took that idea of how about instead of just going back and forth, that we have a more strategic way to create output. And this is really good for features, for greenfield projects. And so we added this directly into the IDE inside our VS Code fork. And people were trying it out and they were like, wow, this is exactly what I wanted. We still left, of course, the vibe code way of going back and forth because you don't always need to create a structured design document and implementation details and requirements documents for everything you're doing. However, we found that that's very useful for a lot of different features. And that's kind of how it was born.
Okay, so the process is I still start with something unstructured, like build me an Airbnb clone or something like that.
Yep.
And then it creates the design document.
Yep.
From that design document, it creates a requirements file. And then what do I do then?
Yeah, so it's built into the editor. So yeah, you can, the way it starts off with is you give it a spec and basically you tell it what it's supposed to do. It creates that requirements document first. And then out of that requirements document, it creates a design. And that design is very specific to what your app is. So it might have technical details of the backend database you're using, the frameworks you're using. It'll have, if you're using TypeScript, like the interfaces that you want. And then from there, it'll create a task list. And the task list will have all the steps in it. And we found that was a little bit, everybody was doing it a little different. Some people were just doing requirements and design. Some people were like just doing requirements implementation. But we thought that 3 steps was what made the most sense. And then in the tasks, after the tasks are created, then you would have Kiro go and implement each task one by one. The one thing that's very important in this process is the human. So at every point, you need to double check the output of what the IDE is doing, because it can get it wrong, and you need to make sure, obviously, it doesn't hallucinate, it didn't misunderstand what you're doing. And so you can actually even go back and forth with it. We did this at my reInvent talk. I did a talk at reInvent. That's the big AWS conference we have in Las Vegas every year. And so we had about an hour on the stage. We did it very ad hoc. It was me and the product manager from Kiro, and we said, hey, we're going to create an app with you live on stage. We're going to live code it. It's non-deterministic because we are using, AI and these large language models with Kiro. And so we did that exactly that. We went in, we gave it a prompt to create a new chat application. It created a requirements document. We went back and forth. We deleted. We told Kiro, hey, can you delete this section? Can you delete this section? Can you add this section? It did that. Then we went to the design. We went back and forth to there. And then we created tasks from it. And it actually was a lot of fun. And it showed exactly kind of the process and feeling of when we're doing these and how we think people should be using these coding editors.
Yeah, it's so fascinating that all of this sounds like a very formalized process of going through those 3 steps, and it's fascinating how much of best practices in software engineering is actually beneficial to AI as much as it is for humans. But like people forgot about it because it was just like my coworker, and now people that did that maybe have a competitive advantage when they are using AI because all the processes are very much in line.
I'll jump in here for a second because that made me just think about everywhere. I'm a huge Reddit fan. I don't know if anybody else listening does. I always like looking on forums, seeing what people are saying. I check all the YouTube channels, and I keep on hearing this thing where people are like, AI, these coding editors, the agentic coding editors, AI coding editors, they don't really help me. That's what I hear a lot. Like I hear people saying, well, they're very good at very specific tasks. Like maybe if I just want them to create tests. But I feel like, and no fault to the people that are writing these posts or these feelings, and some of this is legitimate, but I feel like there's just the lack of education out there of how to use these coding editors, these AI coding editors in the right way, be it Kiro, Cursor, anything else. Like, how do you use plan mode? How do you use spec-driven develop mode? How do you use agents? How do you figure out your code base? And we just talked earlier about context. Like, that is so important. There's things, we call them steering files in Kiro, where you can go through and have it analyze your whole code base. It'll create 3 different steering files, and those will be used every time you talk back and forth to it. But if you don't create steering files and you start going back and forth and trying to have your code editor create a new feature, it might go in a completely wrong direction that you expect it to do. And then you're going to have slop code, and it's going to be that meme of like, AI slop. But if you kind of use these tools in the way they're designed, create specs, use agents, or use skills files, or use requirements mode, MCP servers too, because all the models out there are only as good as the last time they've been trained. And MCP is a perfect way to add more information in so it understands the latest news and the latest things that are happening. I think if you kind of put all those in, you're going to have a much better success rate with using these tools.
Absolutely, and there's also a shift in how you are using that thing. Like when I tried out Kiro, I was looking much less at the source code, which actually was what an IDE is about, right? But now I find myself editing these spec files, using the chat interface a lot more, and don't do direct edits because, like, whenever I try to change something in the source code, I'd rather steer the agent to do the changes for me because all of that will also be reflected in its memory or in its steering files. That's a very interesting shift in how you're using the tools. At least for me, it was.
Yeah, for sure. I've also seen a shift to a lot of people are moving to the command line interfaces, the CLI tools out there. So we have
that
Kiro
was the
CLI
next
too.
topic I was
Yeah.
asking you about. Like, we are seeing them all over the place, right? So what is the reason for that? Is it just a temporary thing because it looks cool, or what's the advantage of having like a TUI for that?
I have some opinions, and these are guesses. What I'm thinking is that people, they love the IDEs. I love the IDEs. I love having that visual interface. But one thing that CLIs is really good for is you can script them, you can run them, have them run multiple times. I've seen people like literally opening up 6 different TMUX multiplexers and then having a CLI agent running on each to do things with using Kiro CLI or Cloud Code or something else. Now, by the way, there's sub-agent mode in Kiro CLI, so you can run multiple things at once. So you don't have to open up 10 different windows. I feel like people want to kind of multitask a little bit, and maybe they're using their normal IDE to go back and forth, and then they're using the CLI to make changes for them. And that's what I'm thinking about, is it just kind of gives you like a nicer way to use the command prompt to go in and make changes to your files, to ask questions, and then you can leave your IDE to do what it's best at and just do its work there. I don't know. I wonder what you think.
Well, I'm not sure about that because like whenever I try to multitask these things, I'm too curious in what code they are generating. So I'm not very good at multitasking with agents. So I fall back to like graphical UIs all the time because it's just more convenient for me to read it and use the mouse to scroll and back and forth button and stuff like that.
Right.
Yeah, but I totally see the appeal. So maybe it's a lack on my side in knowledge, but you can you give us like an example of how a good multitasking would look like?
Well, I'll give you another I'll give you another example of what I've been using it for. So I'm creating a tutorial on EC2. There's kind of a hot topic recently about like using like these serverless managed services to host your websites versus using like virtual private service or VPSs. And I'm creating a tutorial on VPS because it's kind of a fun topic. I'm one of those guys, dude, that grew up on the command line. I love the command line. I'm one of those people that probably spend a little too much time on it. I just setting up my bash configs. I use all my Zish and trying to set that all up. But I was creating this EC2 tutorial, and I was SSHing into the box. And I was like, gosh, I wish I could run some sort of code editor on here so I can make changes and figure out like the errors. So like I was installing, I don't know, Nginx or something, and I was having a problem with it. Then what I did is I took Kiro CLI. There's actually directions how to do this directly on our website, but I curled it directly in. I installed it. You have to do a little bit of port forwarding. It's a little fun little hack, but you do this port forwarding and then you can log in. So you obviously don't need a terminal or anything. It just you port forward to your local PC. You open up a browser. You log in. It connects back into your EC2 instance, and you're good to go. It all goes through the SSH tunnel. And then I was able to go in and ask a questions of like, hey, I noticed my Nginx isn't working. Can you troubleshoot this for me? And then it was able to like look at the sites available and the sites enabled and figured out it didn't create the symbolic link the correct way. And some people I know listening right now are nodding their head because they probably had to deal with these issues. So then I was like, oh, nice. Now I've able to troubleshoot this. So that's like one option I really like, is to be able to run it on the server itself.
Yeah, that's a cool use case. Absolutely. Love it. Probably there's also some use cases in like CI pipelines, maybe automated code reviews or something like that are independent from the platform that you're using. I've seen that also people doing. So basically you just put like a CLI tool and put in a prompt, please review the code of the current commit. And then it does its thing. And yeah, pretty amazing.
Yeah, a little like TaskRabbit almost. Yeah. There's I've seen there's been the nice thing about working at Amazon. We have so many people that are using Kiro and finding all sorts of interesting ways to automate it. And yeah, we should share some of that with everyone. But yeah, there's so many fun ways you can use Kiro to and all these CLIs to automate stuff and to put it in scripts, and that's kind of a clever one too. I haven't heard of that, but I guess you could do like a code review right before. You could do like a Husky hook or something to Kiro, and then have it do a code review for you,
or a summary or whatever.
Yeah, you can also automate like you can put hooks in all these. The CLI and ID have this. So when certain files change, like you could have it update your README file. So you could just be like looking for changes that are occurring, or you can have it automatically create tests for you and just have it kind of running in the background.
So what LLMs is Kiro using in the background?
Yeah, let me take a look. It's always changing, so we keep adding more. So right now, we have auto mode, which is our one that we choose behind the scenes to choose for you. So that's great if you're just starting out. I really like Claude Opus 4.6 and 4.5. Those are both included that you can use. We have Claude Sonnet 4.6, Claude Sonnet 4.5, Claude Sonnet 4, Claude Haiku 4.5. We just added in DeepSeek v3.2, Minimax M2.1, Qwen 3 Coder Next as well. So we're constantly adding more models. We actually just had a blog post on that. What's that?
Okay. We will put that link in the show notes. What was the blog post about?
Yeah, let me see. So we're looking at open weight models and adding more of those in, just because they are, you can get more speed, they're less cost. Not everyone needs to use Claude Opus 4.6 on everything they do. I typically use Claude Opus 4.6 on a lot of things I do if I'm doing coding, but there's times where I'm just doing simple work and you just don't need it. And so we have multipliers in Kiro. So if you use this model, it's X amount. If you use this model, it's less amount. So you can actually save tokens or save price if you go for some of the cheaper models there. So like DeepSeek or Minimax or Qwen 3 Coder Next. So
I had very good experiences with Minimax.
Nice.
That's quite impressive for the price that's sold at. What's your experience in how these models differentiate? Is there something that one particular model can do very well while the other can't, or is there a silver bullet for all tasks?
Well, in the blog post, we talk a little bit about some of the strengths of some of these open weight models. Like, for example, Qwen 3 Coder Next has strong capabilities in error detection, recovery, and tool calling. And then Minimax 2.1, you just said you had some good experiences. It has really good results in like Rust, Java, Go, C++, Kotlin, TypeScript, JavaScript, and more. And it actually has good UI generation capabilities for the web, for Android and iOS. So some of these models have a little bit more strengths than others. Typically, I just leave it on auto. That's what I recommend most people to do if you're not if you're not deep into the weeds on what LLMs are better at what things than others, or if you just want sheer performance, then and you don't mind the credit usage, then Opus 4.5 or 4.6 is the best. There's been a lot of talk recently about Cloud Opus 4.6, if it's how much better it is than 4.5. If you look at Anthropic's all the different blog posts and models, it looks like it is, but in the real world use cases, you may or may not see differences or how well it's doing. I will say though, I've seen this general shift in the last 3 months, and of course this goes out of date quickly. I think 4.5 Opus was just such a good model that just everyone started using it for coding, and it's to the point where it's pretty good. It's still, I think all LLMs are kind of like very eager interns, so they still need guidance, but it was pretty impressive the first time I jumped in and had to go in and create some code for me, a new Node app I'm writing, or an Angular or React app.
So how is Kiro then different from Amazon Q?
Yeah, so Amazon Q was, well, first Amazon Q was an extension inside Visual Studio Code, but it was also VS Code, but it was also in plugins, extensions for other IDEs like JetBrains and things like that. So it's unlike Kiro, which is its own product. It's whole IDE and whole CLI. Q was more of an extension. There was Q CLI, which if you upgraded a few months ago, it actually turned into Kiro CLI from Q CLI. So Q is kind of our first kind of attempt at this. I would say it had some really, it still does. It has some really good things to do conversions, like if you're doing upgrades. But Kiro CLI and Kiro are more independent products. They're for complete IDEs. They're not just extensions or plugins.
Okay, and I would assume that behind the scenes, both Kiro and Q would use Bedrock to actually have access to those LLMs. Is that correct?
Yeah, I don't know all the details of like what's behind the scenes and all of it. I don't know what I can talk about or not. So I'll just say, yeah, obviously Amazon Bedrock is important and our services use them.
One last question is about, like you mentioned it already, like what is a good way how to use these tools? What are your key takeaways on how to get the most out of agentic coding without being frustrated it's going in the wrong direction?
So the question is like, what should you do to...
Like a brief 101 on what not to do and how to do prompts and like how to educate people on using that right. What's the best key takeaway here?
Okay, that's a pretty big question.
I know.
There's so kind of coming to mind here is when you, obviously we already talked about using something like spec-driven development to be able to key in and actually build like larger features and work with larger code bases and build greenfield projects. That all those things can really help with that. Prompting is its own art form. I feel like you have to know exactly how to talk. I feel like now if you just give it a general idea, you can kind of go back and forth and talk about it. I would say in general, just be specific exactly what you want when you are kind of vibe coding or going back and forth with your code editor. So try to tell it exactly what you're looking for. And then if it gets it wrong, make sure to correct it. One nice feature in Kiro and many other these coding editors, you can create checkpoints. You can roll back the checkpoints. So back in the day, everybody was just using Git and just committing after every change in their LLM and then reverting back the commit or rolling back to a previous commit. But now everything has ways to use checkpoints inside of it. So I'd use that to make sure that you can easily go back to a previous version where before it broke something.
So these are just inline in your chat history, basically.
Yep, inline in your chat history. So you can have checkpoints and restore them and go back to previous segments without having to deal with any sort of version control. I would 100% use steering and skills. Skills have become really big recently. A lot of companies are releasing skills. Those are like markdown files with information of how to use a certain service. And you can also create steering docs in Kiro, which are ways that you could read the code base. It'll summarize it together, and then when you talk back and forth, it'll have a better understanding of what your code base is that gets added into the context. I would also set up 1 or 2 MCP servers. There's been debate out there too about, is MCP just stealing your tokens? Is it like clogging up your context? One thing that we've done in Kiro to help with that is we have something called Kiro powers, which are it's kind of like a higher level skills, but it includes MCP servers, skills. It can create hooks. Companies can create their own. We have several. I think we have like 20, 30 different skills, and then it's open source, and you can add in your own skills. Not skills, powers. We have about 30 different powers, and you can add your own powers too, as well. And then those load dynamically in and out. So if you're using Nullify, when you mention Nullify into the chat window, it'll load the power and everything inside of it, and then it'll unload it once you're done. So I mean, those are all like little tidbits of things that you can do to be able to be more successful. There's a lot of communities. I would check out our Kiro channel. We have a YouTube Kiro channel, which you can check out. Podcasts like this are amazing to get good information about everything like AI related as well.
Absolutely.
I can keep going, but I think I'm kind of rambling now.
Yeah, thank you. That was very much information, very dense. We learned a lot. Thank you for sharing that with us.
Yeah, you're welcome.
Erik, have a good day.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me on.